defeat in war, occupation and division. This is how Germany looked in the summer of 1945. There was a total devastation and poverty everywhere. So the best minds of the nation fled, some to the USA, others were taken to the Soviet Union. Territories were carved out from the country, factories and plants were dismantled, but huge debts were left behind. So what is its future? The highest quality cars, medicines and trains in the world, the most famous and respected clothing brands, the most precise football, roads and beer. So how do the Germans do it? And who helped them with this? The top 10 most expensive companies in Germany today. If you take a closer look, more than half of them are quite ancient fellows, over 100 years old. For comparison, in the USA, only one old-timer is in the top of the most expensive, and in Japan too, and in China there are none at all. Moreover, pay attention, all of them, these Germans, are not trading in resources. In the German top, there are the most complex productions and goods that ordinary people around the world use. Cars, pharmaceuticals, trains. In 19th century Germany, it's like China today. It's very cheap there, which means it's profitable to produce something. And if modern China has rich Americans and Europeans at hand who happily buy everything Chinese and move their production there as much as possible, then in the Germany of that time, the main buyer was the rich and powerful Great Britain. And this will continue for a long time, even when in the mid-60s of the 20th century, the Germans will take second place in the world in car production. Attention, the number of car owners in Germany will be half of what it is in Great Britain. So why does Germany become such a convenient and attractive place for production? I personally noticed three things that have always been with the Germans, whether in the 19th, 20th centuries or today. First, it's state support. You've probably heard the name of this stern man, Otto von Bismarck. Besides uniting the German lands into a single empire and becoming its first chancellor, he also passed a bunch of laws that initially encouraged investments in German companies. In an agrarian and religious country, finally an industrial revolution happened, and they started building railways, locomotives and factories. But then, when a crisis comes, Bismarck introduces customs barriers. Why? To prevent the local industry from dying and to continue developing, otherwise foreign competitors would devour it. And here is the second thing that attracts foreign and any investors to Germany the most: German workers. They are hardworking, obedient and attention, very cheap. Yes, that's what American journalist Ray Stanner Baker writes in his book Sin in Germany. Probably no civilized worker in the world would agree to trade places with a German. You have to work harder for less pay, eat coarser and cheaper food. Here in Germany, a company at the shipyard earns about 90 cents a day for 11 hours of work. In America, a company usually gets paid $2.50 or $3 for 8 hours. And finally, the third. Germans really like to work long hours and for themselves. But before we return to Germany after World War II, I want you to understand one very important thing. The country we are accustomed to calling Germany is heterogeneous and can be easily divided into eastern and western parts. And it's not because after World War II, Soviet troops occupied the eastern part, making it backward, while the Americans were in the western part, making it great. Look at the map of German companies. Where they originate from? Remember, yes? How many among them are pre-war veterans? And it's clear that all economic activity in Germany has always been in the western and southern regions, while the political center, for some reason, has always been in Berlin. And for the past 150 years, the country has lived by this principle. The western part earns money, Berlin taxes them and subsidizes Eastern Germany, because it's a national duty. Why do we need to know all this? Well, to fully understand what exactly happens with a destroyed country after World War II. Or is Germany not as destroyed as we think? 1946. In the country, every other person is unemployed. Every third person can't afford their own coffin. And only every fifth child sleeps in their own bed. Because, for example, Dresden looks like this. Or in Cologne, before the war there were 7,500 people living, and right after only 32,000. But the problem isn't just with housing, it's also with money. They physically exist, here they are, Reichsmarks. But morally, they are worthless to anyone. So how so? People live through barter exchange. Eggs for cigarettes, boots for beer. And instead of working, people spend time trying to find the necessary goods. And in May of 48, the average German misses 9.5 working hours a week to buy food and essentials. So effectively he's skipping a whole workday somewhere. And then comes another man with a stern look, Ludwig Erhard. He's the Minister of Economics and later Chancellor. And he comes up with a radical monetary reform. So imagine, June 21st, 88. Across the country, it's announced that citizens, your money, Reichsmarks, are no longer valid. But you can exchange them. No, not for cigarettes, for your new Deutschmarks. But don't rush to celebrate. Each of you will only get 60 marks, no more. 40 right now, another 20 in a month. Or, and all the best you have, well, if it happens to be in bank accounts, we'll exchange at a rate of 10 to 1. So you give us 10 Reichsmarks and we'll give you just 1 Deutschmark. And so if you are too slow, you are too late. The old money simply burns away. So why does Erhard do this? In less than a month, he hits 60 million people. Well, literally, leaving them without money. And is he praised for it? Yes. And do you know why? Remember, I told you that West Germany is more industrially developed than the East. And you remember the photos of the destroyed cities, right? But how do the factories fare after the war? Do you think they're in the same state as the cities? Well, why would they be? When the war is ending, the Allies, the British, the Americans mercilessly bomb residential homes. And especially the military factories, where tanks and bombs are made, get hit hard. But the rest of the German industry barely suffers from the bombing. About 6.5% of the enterprises are destroyed. So here is a ready-made industrial monster. Just take it and use it. But how do you do that when there is no normal currency and people find it more profitable to get eggs and cigarettes than marks? At the moment of Erhard's tough monetary reform, it's the owners of enterprises, real estate, and those who have large stocks or goods in their hands who will benefit. But ordinary workers, well, do you remember how they felt about the past? They'll suffer now, especially when there are ruins all around. So let them be glad they are alive and not in Eastern Germany, otherwise they'd be sent to the Soviet Union to rebuild for free. And Erhard knows the Germans and turns out to be right. Indeed, after the reform, the shelves of stores are filled with product. Production resumes at factories. And Germany once again becomes what it has always been, a country where you can produce everything very cheaply and with high quality. And as the result, since 1959, Germany has consistently been in the top 3 major global exporters. So meaning it's one of the countries that produces and sells the most to other countries. And here is another very important point. Why did Germany manage to return to the top so swiftly? How will the Americans react to the owners of German businesses? Take, for instance, the well-known company Hugo Boss, famous not only for its stylish suits and popular fragrances. In 1933, they received a very lucrative order to tailor uniforms like this. But the founder of the company, Hugo Ferdinand Boss, didn't stop there. When World War II began, his factory was declared an important military enterprise, and they began to sew uniforms for all German soldiers. And who sewed them? That's right, prisoners of war from France, Poland, and, according to some reports, from Ukraine. Some survivors later revealed that the factory wasn't much different from a concentration camp. Hunger, unsanitary conditions, and overwork. Attention, question. What happened to Hugo himself during the official denazification? Would he be shot, hanged, or his company closed down? No. Hugo was recognized as a collaborator with the Nazis, had his voting rights revoked, and was fined 80,000 marks. That's it. Then he peacefully died. The company continued to operate, soon releasing its first men's suit and becoming a symbol of style and elegance. So today, Hugo Boss employs tens of thousands of employees voluntarily. And its faces are not Wehrmacht officers, but American stars. And the case with Hugo Boss is not unique. Here, let me introduce to Alfred Krupp. During the war, he led the largest and most famous industrial conglomerate in German history, Friedrich Krupp. Yes, they produced all the Nazi tanks, guns, bombs, staff cars, and their factories actively utilized slave labor. They even established private concentration camp on their premises. The SS directly transferred slaves to the Krupp conglomerate, where they became its personal property and worked until they died. So listing Alfred Krupp's contributions to the German fatherland would take forever. But in brief, he oversaw all the military industry enterprises in occupied territories. And you can guess how he managed them. So he was also the president of Adolf Hitler's foundation and held the official rank of colonel.
Emperor of German Iron and Steel was Alfred Krupp. He was captured by us and handed over to the American authorities in 1946 for trial at Nuremberg.
And you know what they will do with him after the war? In 1948, he will be sentenced to 12 years in prison. 12! A man who oversees factories where slaves die, causing havoc across Europe. But that's not even the most important part. Already in 1951, just 3 years later, the Supreme Commissioner of the American Occupation Zone, John McCloy, will sign an amnesty, and in 1953 Krupp will be released. So he will reclaim his personal fortune, once again lead the Krupp conglomerate, revive the factories, and happily manage them until he dies in 1967. Now, I think you have a logical question. Where does such mercy come from for people who essentially voluntarily support Hitler and profited from his regime without hiding, without any shame? So we need to understand what Americans and their allies fear and what they want. Just a reminder, the victorious countries divided Germany into 4 occupation zones. The Soviet zone was in the east, while the western zones were controlled by the United States, Britain, and France. Stalin installed a complete communist government in his zone and quickly began dismantling factories and plants, shipping them back to the USSR as compensation for the destruction and losses suffered on Soviet territory during the war. But that's not all. Stalin demanded to participate in the administration of the British occupation zone. So, why? Because that's where most of Germany's industry is located. And that means there is money to be made. And really, folks, hello! Why do we all need a strong Germany again just for it to attack someone else? Because after World War I, the Germans were left in debt and poverty just like this. So look at this beautiful banknote. So do you know what it says on it? 1 billion marks. So a billion mark note. That's the hyperinflation that happened in Germany after World War I. But it seems like the Western allies aren't keen on repeating their mistakes, and everyone understands that Stalin's plan to keep Germany from getting rich is just the prelude to the communists taking over the entire country. As it's known, weakness and poverty, and consequently resentment and anger, can lead an individual, a nation, or a country to any unpredictable upheaval. And the best remedy for all this is prosperity. So that's why the factories that used to produce bombs and tanks are being rebuilt. The factories continue to produce clothing because people need somewhere to work, and it's better to do it in existing enterprises. But Americans will not allow them to be nationalized under any circumstances. They fear the communists, and who better to manage them than the founders and owners themselves? No one. So let them work. They need to produce. And yes, you've probably heard that after World War I, defeated Germany will be burdened with huge reparations. That is, the country that lost the war is obligated to pay debts to the victors, the Americans themselves. And do you know what the Americans will do with the German debts after World War II? Those are massive debts, 379 billion Reichsmarks. So, with the same currency reform under the cover of the US Army, these debts will be annulled. And to prevent communists from breaking into West Germany, the country will be turned into a showcase of capitalism. It's incredibly stupid to stretch cliches that Germans are like this or that. First of all, there are 84 million of them. And secondly, everything changes. In the 1950s, migrants from the eastern part were welcome workers because they were fleeing the regime and were willing to work for peanuts just to avoid returning to the GDR. But what definitely works for Germany in all epochs and makes it one of the most developed countries in the world is that doing business and working with Germans is very clear and understandable. They have always been and will always be technologists because the engineering and scientific school has been preserved for centuries. And all this accumulated experience is passed down through inheritance. In Germany, there have always been and will always be high-quality workers. And yes, unlike the late 19th century, German workers today don't overwork at all. According to the UN, the average German works only 1,413 hours per year. So this is less than in Mexico, Chile, or Ukraine. So people spend half as much time working and produce many times more. It's a Italian situation. The late 90s, BMW opens its plant in the USA, and it turns out that American workers don't approach their duties as precisely and meticulously as Germans do at home. But here comes automation to the rescue. And therein lies both the strength and the weakness of the nation. Whenever the world spirals into chaos, the Germans continued to close their eyes and work diligently, because there is order and there is work to be done. So sometimes this works out well, as in the 2008 financial crisis, when countries were drowning in debt, yet everyone was buying German machinery, equipment and cranes. And sometimes, with their silent consent, world wars happen. So while order is good, silent agreements are questionable at best.